All right. Good morning, everybody. Should we get started?
Yes, let's do it.
All right. Looks like our first up on the agenda, we have John. Are you ready to talk about Gateway API customizations?
Yes, I am.
All right.
So this is something I think we presented from Keith, the design doc earlier. At that point, it was an early, pretty early doc. So now I've kind of taken it and got an implementation and finalized some of the more concrete details. So I wanted to walk through it if there was interest. We've got some feedback already from a few users because this was a pretty hotly demanded issue, and I asked people to give feedback. So I've got some good feedback there, but want to talk through the points here. So the high level goal here is that today when you create Gateway API gateways, whether these are ingress or waypoints, there's not really much customization. We've added a few things, but it's pretty ad hoc. It's like two things really. I think you can do like the CPU and memory and maybe the security context or something. Gateway API has this newish field that's first class in the API under the infrastructure field, that parameters ref, which is kind of supposed to be an extension that you can then go put arbitrary things to customize. So the idea of this PR is basically exposing that option to our users. And so we have kind of a hierarchy of, we have the built-in defaults, which of course we have to have some settings for the service and the deployment and whatnot if they don't customize anything. And then you can override that at the gateway class level with gateway class settings, or at the gateway level with per gateway settings. Each of these is going to reference a config map. The config map for the gateway class has to live in the Istio system. The other ones have to live in the same namespace as the gateway. Let's see, what else is there? So one thing, a few things to call it here. Gateway class has a parameters ref field, and I chose not to use it, which is maybe controversial. I don't think users should modify gateway class is basically my thing. I think the gateway class API with parameters ref is just broken upstream. So I could see why that may just be my opinion, and we don't want to fall, and we should follow the upstream API. But I think in this case, it's worth not following it. And it sounds like there's agreement there, so that's good. What I have done is hard coded a naming scheme of the config map. So, you know, it's not the most amazing thing I've ever come up with, but open to alternatives. Onto the config map shape. Oh, sorry, Costin. It looks like you're talking, but I can't hear you at all. I just see you have.
Waiting for you to finish. And
okay, yeah, okay. Onto the config map. So what I went with was basically, when we deploy a gateway, we end up creating a bunch of objects. Today, there's 3: service account, deployment, and service. And so you may want to customize any of those. So the route that I took for the config map was basically the keys of the config map would be the type name. And then what you put there is overlaid using the normal strategic patch merge of Kubernetes. This field is not templated. So in like the sidecar injection overrides, you can do like Go templates, and we run the Go template and then we apply the result on top. We don't have the Go template phase here. We could, of course, add it later. It would be totally backwards compatible to add. But it does introduce some complexity and kind of makes the API less stable, because then part of the API is what fields we expose in the template. I don't know there's as much use case for it today, so I didn't include it, but it wouldn't surprise me if eventually we include it. I think the last thing to call out here is that we only expose 3 fields, but it's really common for users to want to deploy an HPA and a pod disruption budget. In theory, there's like an infinite number of resources they may want to include with the gateway. And I don't think we want to become an arbitrary, you create a gateway and you get arbitrary resources created as like a general purpose operator. But it does feel like to me the PDB and HPA cases are so useful and common enough that they're worth being first class. So what I did, technically in the PR, I only did HPA, but I think we should do it for PDB as well, is if you specify an override for the HPA, then we will deploy a default one, and then we'll apply your override on it. So by having a customization at all, you're opting into the HPA, and then you can also customize it. So if you just want the HPA with default settings, which is not useful, but if you wanted it, then you would just put like horizontal pod, autoscaler, empty string, for example, and that would enable the HPA. I think that's all the high level bits. So wanted to see what people thought of this. Yeah, Costin.
Yeah, so John, I mean, what can I say? My preference was always to let people actually use real Kubernetes resources. So if you want an HPA, you create an HPA. If you want a service account with different properties, you create a service account, and the reconciliation is just ignoring it if it's already created by the user. The basic problem is this approach requires that we document the resource names, basically. So we document, hey, we create a deployment with the name X, and if you create a HPA with, basically the labels that we generate, and the user can just use whatever they want to customize. So it's not convoluted with you put a resource in Istio system, the user is no longer being able to use it because they don't have permission, and then they have to use some Istio specific config maps, and we are back to config map and injection and the old style, when a much cleaner solution is to just create the resources as ever with validation and all the other stuff, and give them the user full control. If we just document, I'm not saying we should not also do that. We do a lot of other things, but we should have the simple solution as well, which just requires documentation mostly and making sure we don't override.
I see we have a lot of hands. I don't know if they're responding to Costin, go ahead, but I want to make sure we respond to that before we move on.
Mine's sort of response to Costin. I think I prefer this approach for the customization, and I appreciate John pushing that forward. Mainly because I think you brought this up in the past in your comment, Costin. But like the other approach of making the user create the service account, etc., the user has to know what the naming is, and this feels a lot cleaner to where we're not exposing the implementation detail of our naming scheme. Because, for example, just off the top of my head, for ingress gateways, we append the gateway class waypoints. We don't append the gateway class. Like a user should never have to think about that, and that's why one of the reasons I really like this proposal. My other question is to John. What is the override look like? So, like if an admin sets a field at the gateway class level, the what's it called? The app developer can overwrite that with this model. That's correct, right?
Yes. So the app developer has full control. I hypothetically could see a use case where you want maybe the admin to be like, you must have this field set and no one can override it. But in my mind, that's not meaningful, because ultimately all of this is a helper, right? If you don't want the user to set a field in something, don't control the gateway, control that object itself, the underlying object. That's my take, at least. Going back to Costin's thing, one thing to keep in mind is we do have documentation today to attach extra policies to things. That's pod disruption budget and HPA. I feel less strongly about including those, because, hey, you can't do it today. It's kind of nice. You get the full customization. Like everything you said is true. The reason why I included it just seems like all the users are demanding it. And I see why as well. Like it is much simpler to be able to say, like at the global level, hey, all my waypoints, I need, minimum 2 replicas and auto scaling, because that's my policy on things, for example. Now, I don't know how you feel about HPA and pod disruption budget versus like deployment. I feel more strongly that this is helpful for like deployment and service, because a user would struggle quite a bit with manually creating the deployment and service in most cases. They can still, like, even with this PR, we're not removing the escape hatch, that you can go deploy completely arbitrary things and then attach the gateway to it. But I don't think that's like the first class use case. And like, then you're responsible, for example, keeping the service in sync with the listeners, like all the ports, that sort of thing.
I'm not saying we should have just one solution. I'm saying that users should be able to customize in its own namespace with the normal Kubernetes resources. And we should also have what we described here as a kind of default for
yeah.
the admin.
Yeah,
But-
no, I definitely, I agree. Like
Okay.
and we do have that today. It's just very awkward, which is why there's such a big demand for this.
we-
So I don't think anything here would remove the ability to do things manually.
Well, we have it as a kind of hidden. I mean, it is maybe partially documented, and Kit believes that it should not even be documented. So I want to make sure that what we have today is properly documented, supported, and we are not saying that the only way to do it is by creating config marks and all this complicated stuff. If the user, because the user can create a deployment with whatever names they want and run envoys by themselves. It's not like they don't have ability to manage their own stuff and requires the admin to override it. And I don't agree with kids that users should never, when they are managing it, it's running in their own namespace. They need to see it because they need telemetry. They need to know what those things are doing. We cannot just say, hey, implementation details, some pods will show up in your namespace and good luck. We don't tell you what to do about them. But it's just a documentation. I'm not suggesting we don't do what you're suggesting. Just we provide the simpler solution.
Got it. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So like we do have some documentation. We can beef it up and also make sure we don't drop it. Like this will be in addition to the docs, not a replacement for the existing ones. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay, I think Lynn was up and then Daniel.
Can I ask a clarification question? So is
Yep.
it correct to interpret in your example, certainly gateway HTTP route, I can place it on the namespace level. The gateway option, I think it's also, it could do globally and also could be namespace level. But the other one, the default class, I'd imagine that would be at the system level, right? You don't want a namespace to set a default gateway class for Istio. Is that
There's only two levels. There's gateway class level, which is effectively global, but technically there's like waypoints and ingress are separate. So it's not fully global, but there's two globals. And then there's per gateway. There's not a middle tier that's per namespace.
But couldn't you have one config map that you reference for multiple
Oh yeah,
gateways?
yeah, that's true. You could share the config map, but you do still have to reference it explicitly in your gateways. So you could have like, for just a contrived example, 3 gateways in one namespace and 2 config maps, and 2 of them are pointed one to the other or something, right?
so the Istio default gateway class, is that just for the waypoint? Sounds like it's not. So what if I want to have my waypoint have a particular gateway class and maybe my ingress is a different class?
Yeah, so by default, you have an Istio class and an Istio waypoint class. And for each of those, you can attach a config map to it that sets the defaults for those classes. So
Okay.
like this example right here, if you look down at the bottom, I think this is Mitch scrolling at the bottom of the YAML. I've got this class that says it's the default for the Istio gateway class. And then it's setting this annotation that says John gateway class, hi, X. So that will apply to all the Istio ones, but not all the waypoint ones.
John, how does this connect to the Istio gateway class? Did you need to modify the gateway class to point to
No,
it with
so
parameters?
that's the tricky thing. So in gateway class, like we don't want users to write to gateway class. That's the tricky part. And at least that's my claim. Maybe we change that. And so how do we attach something to gateway class without them writing to it? Well, we reference the gateway class from the object, right? So I have this naming scheme that is Istio default gateway class dash the gateway class name. It's pretty wonky. I can't deny. Like I had thought of doing like a label that's like, you know, Istio.io defaults for gateway class equals Istio. The only problem with that is that then you can have multiple, and then we have to do like which one is the one to use. So having a name is much simpler, but it is also super implicit that like, where is the connection between this gateway and the gateway class? It's kind of implied through the name, which is awkward.
Gateway class and all cluster-wide resources are equal. I mean, I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
It's not good, especially if you take security into account and isolation and ability to run different namespaces. It's much better to avoid it as much as possible.
Daniel, I think you're up.
No strong opinion on the gateway class. I think actually we can let people edit them, but really no strong opinion. What I do feel strongly about though is if we can have an option to disable this, because we already have the use case that we want to be able to have gateway classes where users can create gateways, but the mesh admin completely controls what they look like, and they should not have the option to customize them. So I would really like an option to either at the gateway class level, but I realize that adds another thing on the gateway class, or if that's not possible at the STOD level, to be able to say gateway customizations off, please, because we want to lock down the way our users use the gateways.
That seems plausible. Yeah. Yeah, I'd have to think if we do it on like, do you make the like config map and say somewhere like allow per gateway override true false or something, or if we just do like an environment variable that needs to do. But I think having a way to turn off makes sense. You're only concerned about the gateway one, right? Not the gateway class one, since that already requires Istio system privilege.
Yeah, no, gateway class I see as mesh admin level. So
yeah,
that's, if you want to define defaults there, then that's on the mesh admin anyway. I don't see end users creating gateway classes. So that's okay for me. So it's really just the gateway customization. And then what I really like about this is we can phase out the other like escape hatches we created. Like there's this one service type annotation, right, where you can edit the type of the service, and then we also copy all labels and annotations. So maybe for this stuff we can add another environment variable and then keep it there for one release so people can migrate off of it and then remove it.
But the better solution for that is to have an admission controller or other policies to make sure that, because at the end of the day, the user can create a deployment, put the right labels, whatever, and it will, we cannot prevent users from creating deployments in their own namespaces. And it's just a matter of putting the right settings in the deployment, and it will act as a gateway.
Yeah, I do generally agree with that. Like, it really depends on how much you're trying to do. If you really don't want your tenants to be able to accept the foo field and service, you can't control that at this level, right? Because they can just make the service or modify it. But if it's, just stop them from doing something dumb, then I do see how that's valuable for sure.
One, to answer Daniel's question in the chat, yes, there is a field in Gateway API called infrastructure within Gateway spec, where the user sets labels and annotations. If that's set, it's legacy now, and if the infrastructure labels and annotations are set, then we don't automatically copy everything. So that's the preferred way forward. I'm also in favor of finding a way to phase that out. Just because, again, there's a first-class way we should try to coalesce around that way. The other thing I'll bring up as far as this, cause I know I've got some other topics to get to. But the more I stew on it, the naming of the config map feels like it makes sense for a name for like a convention, but it also feels too magic, and it's going to be really difficult for users to query what's happening. I like the idea of a label because then you can at least with one kubectl command see what's being applied to the gateway. You can see if there's a conflict. If that does, if users do accurately deploy more than one config map, and you can check the creation time and to see which one's being applied. I think we already have the heuristics for how to deal with the conflict, and so that the queryability we get based on the gateway name label is a benefit I think we should try to persist.
Yeah, I everything you said makes sense. Yeah. It would be nice if this was our own CRD or something, it'd probably just have like special name, like default or something. Like a lot of projects do that for singletons. The thing I don't like about the label is then it's like, what happens if they have two? Sure, we pick the oldest one, but then, you know, does the user understand that now? What do they do? And do we report that in status? And it just becomes a lot more complicated, but I do agree it's probably the better way to go about it ultimately. Ian, I think you're also up.
Can anyone hear him? I can't hear Ian if he's talking.
Yeah, we can't hear you. You are muted now, by the way.
Okay, well, he wrote something on the doc, so I'll maybe say it out loud in case
Okay.
maybe that's what he's going to say. He basically said, is there anything stripped out of the config map? What if they try to set meta.name, for example? That's a great point. Probably even more problematic would have been setting the namespace. That's a good point. I don't know what will happen, but it sounds bad, and we should definitely handle that use case. So thank you for probably saving us from a security incident down the line. Nice.
Okay, maybe I'm asking something similar now that I realize. Is there a way to refer the config map, like the gateway option, cross namespace, or that's not?
No, so no is the answer. In the API, there's not a way to do it. I mean, technically, we could hack in a way if we wanted to, but I have not chosen to do that. I think the main use cases when you want to do that is probably because you want to have global or per namespace.
Right.
You already have the global. The one thing that is missing that, like if you compare our sidecar customizations, in the sidecar, you can go at the global level and define a bunch of like templates, right? Like you could say, here's my high availability one, here's my enable Spire one, here's my, I don't know, disable admin interface, I don't know, whatever you want. And then at each resource, you can go say, okay, I need these, I need Spire and HA or something. We don't have that here. We just have one global and one override. So there is some advanced functionality gap there to some extent. Technically, you can make multiple gateway classes and then, you know, map each one to its own gateway class. That being said, I don't think majority of users need that functionality. And in the cases where they do, there's ways that they can work around it. But I did want to call it that as a gap with what we have with sidecars.
Okay, yeah, the workaround, I guess, is you just deployed the config map, which has the gateway option, to whichever namespace you need the configuration.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, John, do you feel like you got the feedback you need there?
Yeah, I do, unless there's more feedback. Let me copy Ian's comment into the doc. So I will go take that. I guess one thing we didn't decide on is, do we want to do the HPA and pod disruption budget aspect? I didn't see anyone say no, so. Okay, sounds like yes. I will take this all and update the PR and make it ready for review in coming days. This would be for 126, so we have, you know, a couple months, but it shouldn't take long. Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Next up on the agenda, we have Puru with a question about Kubernetes and Istio certification. I don't see Puru in the room. Is anyone else prepared to speak on this?
I saw some discussion about this in Slack earlier today on a thread that Puru started. Basically, Kubernetes 1.31 is not listed as supported for Istio 1.23. Are mainly asking what needs to happen there. Samit was talking to Puru and other folks about opening a PR in the prod config just to have tests running there. But just as it doesn't seem to have happened yet. I think the TLDR here is that no objections, just if somebody is willing to do the work, then we'll be willing to have 123 certified for 131. Does that sound right to folks?
Would the idea be that essentially, like, we're going to run the tests, and if the tests pass, we say it's certified? What do we do if the tests failed?
I don't know that that's happened in a long time. Yeah, you call me a liar, Mitch, because I keep telling people, I promise you it'll work. That's a good question. Like, we would probably be good to say it doesn't work explicitly on the table.
I think we have a number of combinations of Istio and Kubernetes version that we don't support, but that we can certify nevertheless. It's like, we're going to run the tests and we're going to tell you that they passed. But if for some reason, like a super old version of Kubernetes, if 127 stops working with Istio 126, we'll tell you by saying the test didn't pass, but we're not going to do anything to fix it, right?
Yeah, that was kind of what I was actually going to ask as well. I think along those lines is when we say certified, like, we have two columns on the docs. We have supported and tested but not supported. Are we talking about, which one are we talking about? I think it should be in tested but not supported, basically.
I agree with that letter of the law wise. I do think there's because the issues with the discrepancies in the release cadence between Istio and Kubernetes, we do every year get a couple of awkward releases where just by virtue of timing, there's a Kubernetes version that a existing current version of Istio is not supported for. So, like, if assuming tests pass, I think we should put it in the supported version. Again, assuming that version is still supported, for example, and the Kubernetes version is new and supported. I'm a +1 on, or rather, I'm a -1 on supporting the things that Mitch was describing. I think that's very firmly in testing but not supported. But I don't think users should suffer just by virtue of a difference in release cadence between the two projects.
Yeah, I want to agree with you. Like, I think for sure, in this case, 123 with 131. There's no reason to mark that as supported because a user can just do 124, which we prefer anyways. But at the other end, if say 133 came out tomorrow, by that logic, we'd go add it to supported, and then eventually 126 comes out and it supports 133 as well. It's not like we're going to go back and remove it. So we are, like, still, regardless, adding more versions, which is fine. Like, there's no reason we have to only support 4 Kubernetes versions. It's more just that we want to make our lives easier and not say that we support the 10 that actually work and then have to be committed to that. Like, we would rather under promise and stick to 4, which is 4 is already quite a bit, than be stuck saying we support like 8 versions and suddenly we have an issue. To be fair, this is way less of a problem now than it was like 3 years ago. So we haven't been broken by Kubernetes in a very long time. So I guess after all that rambling, I'm sure I'm fine with it, adding to supported versions. I'm definitely fine adding it to tested but not supported, but if it's the latest Kubernetes version and the latest Istio version, I suppose I'm fine adding it to supported versions personally.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I don't think it's ever going to be the latest Istio version. It's going to be the N-1. So, like, when this was first brought up in the Slack, it was February 5th, 125 wasn't out yet. So all we had was 124 and 123. And so, like, we wouldn't say like 122 is supported on Kubernetes 131, but I do think you should have at least 2 on the latest Kubernetes version so that users don't have to upgrade for lack of support, if that makes sense.
I'm not sure I understand. Like, let's say hypothetically Kubernetes 133 comes out tomorrow.
Right.
Why do we shouldn't we just add that to 125 and then your upgrade path is upgrade to 125 and then you can upgrade Kubernetes to 133?
I mean, in my mind, I want to, like, if I'm a user, I'd want to keep one thing stable. Like, I want to upgrade my Kubernetes and then I guess eventually upgrade my Istio. And
but why Kubernetes first and then Istio, not the other way around?
Well, that's fair.
I mean, I'm not too against it. Like, it doesn't, like, it's not that big of a deal. It just,
in my mind, users just tend to, my experience with users is that they for better or for worse, they tend to optimize for stability and not changing things when they don't have to. And so just by virtue of that, perspective, it doesn't feel great for like the ultimate reason for you having to upgrade Istio earlier than usual, because usually we give you 6 months. Now it's no longer 6 months if you want to move your Kubernetes version. We're like moving that clock forward. I don't feel strongly about it on my side. So I guess we're on opposite sides of don't feel too strongly. So if somebody wants to tie break, I'll be happy to go with whoever.
I don't know how
On the break
big
side.
actually this group of users is who want to be on the bleeding edge of Kubernetes but not Istio. I don't know if this is a real problem, is it?
Yeah,
Very
what
good
I've
point.
seen is they're like these people want to be on the bleeding edge Kubernetes, and then they look at our docs and say, "Oh, Istio is not supported though, so I'm going to hold off on the Kubernetes upgrade," which is not good. I don't know that I've commonly seen. I only want to upgrade Kubernetes and then not Istio. So I agree with Daniel. I'm sure
Yes,
someone exists, but
just to be clear, I'm with you that I think we should do it for the latest minor, but for older minor versions, I see that more as something, if you want that kind of support, you usually go to a vendor. When you say, I want to be N-3 on my Istio version, but do whatever I want on the platform, then maybe that's for a vendor and not a community project.
Yeah, the point about the bleeding edge Kubernetes thing is taken well. I'm cool with it being a small carrot to be used to upgrade, because ultimately, like, that's what we'd advise customer users to do anyway. I know we do at Azure. We advise them to upgrade more frequently rather than less. So yeah, I'll change my mind. I'm good for it just to be the latest version.
Oh yeah, I have this PR up there. Yeah, I couldn't attend last week because I was out sick. Yeah, I have this PR which allows custom config map names for the root cert config map that we use, and there was a little bit of discussion whether config map is the way to go anyway in the long run, which I think we all agreed on that it's not, and we probably want to migrate to cluster trust bundles. And I looked at that a little bit, and I want to push a PR. We still have this use case where we need to customize the name, be it the cluster trust bundle or the config map, doesn't matter, to support the case where you have multiple control planes and they have overlapping namespaces. Currently, we have this experimental multi-control plane support, right, which where you need to clearly separate the namespace sets of the control planes. And we want to break that up a little bit because we have customers that need this. And we previously had we had a multi-tenant solution in Red Hat Service Mesh. But we want to migrate people off of it, and we want to invest into the multi-control plane support upstream. So we want to make sure that also those use cases work. And then apart from that, we also have the use case that we want to use Istio as a gateway controller, gateway API controller that runs in the cluster. And you can also install a control plane for mesh functionality. So we have one instance that basically watches all namespaces because it reconciles gateway API. And then we have a user instance that you could have discovery selectors on to only look at certain namespaces, but it could also be the whole cluster. And we want to make sure that they can work alongside. And the biggest blocker right now for that is really the config map names, because if both control planes have the namespace sets overlapping, then they will try to write to the same config map with their own keys, with their own certs, and that obviously doesn't work. Yes, Carsten?
I'm trying to understand, are you talking about the solution for trust bundles when we use trust bundles, or a solution for config map, or both?
Technically for both. So first for config maps, until the cluster trust bundles isn't even beta yet. So that's not going to be sort of the stable solution for a while. But so it'll have to work for config maps, but I also want it to work for cluster trust bundles eventually. That's why I named the field trust bundle name now. And yeah, it's effectively just being able to choose the name of the root cert basically that you want to propagate in the cluster.
If you confirm that it works with Trust Bundle and have an implementation of Trust Bundle that works, and then I'm happy with it. I mean, we are treating the config maps as kind of a poor man substitute for Trust Bundle. If Trust Bundle is not available, kind of fall back to it. But I want to make sure we are not going to change it when Trust Bundles are in, and we still, naming is Trust Bundle, and it's just kind of a fallback, not a.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the idea. That's why I renamed it to Trust Bundle name. So it's going to work on config maps for the time being, and then hopefully very soon we can migrate it off to cluster trust bundles.
Can I ask a clarification question? You said you want to use Istio as our OpenShift Gateway API provider. Do you mean using Istio as the control plane for your OpenShift Gateway, or do you mean using Istio's gateway and maybe Waypoint as your OpenShift gateway provider?
Both. So we want to have a control plane, an Istio control plane that reconciles the gateway API objects, and also the gateway pods will also be running Istio proxy and envoys.
So that's so basically your OpenShift gateway is built on top of Istio gateway.
Exactly, that's the plan.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Is this just for the ingress case or for east-west traffic as well?
You mean OpenShift gateway?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's currently just for ingress use case.
Cool. Thanks. Just curious.
This might be sort of a dumb question, but if you're just using it for ingress, then why do you need the meshes root cert?
Well, we're using it just for ingress now, but we also want to be able to wire it up to user meshes in the future.
Gotcha. Okay.
But you need the root cert anyway for the proxies to authenticate against Istio, right? So you need it even if it's use gateways.
I think you need it on the inner cert of your gateway when it talks to the workload in the mesh. Is that your understanding too, Keith?
Yes, for mesh, I was asking for if they're just using ingress, then I don't think you need it because
Yes.
if I recall correctly, the flow for authoring the Istio is using the JOT for the service account and not the cert.
Right.
Because it gets the cert via STS. But if you wanted to expand the pods later, that's fine. That's more of a curiosity question, if anything.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Is it used for MTLS from the ingress to, not for east-west, but from the ingress to the backend pods?
Yes, it is for that lag. So Keith's point is if you're just doing ingress, you don't need it. But if from that hop from your ingress to your backend pod that's in the mesh, then you need it.
And to be clear, you can still do mutual TLS to a backend pod that's not in the Istio mesh. So if the pod is doing its own TLS, you can do the full end-to-end without having that root CA. But if you have a pod in the Istio mesh, you will need the root cert.
I'm not given how many options we have, I'm not entirely sure that it's completely accurate, but mostly yes.
But wait, this cert is mounted into the gateway though. Into the gateway pods.
That's true. It's not STS. The root cert is mounted. I'm not sure.
I thought it was used for authenticating the controller, sort of when requesting its own certificate.
That's
okay. That's right. I remember now. Okay. Yeah. So it is JOT verification on the backside, but the client still needs to trust the Istio DNS cert That's what I
Yeah.
was forgetting. Okay, I'm with you now.
Yeah.
My apologies.
I was worried My apologies. I was worried a moment that I'm completely misunderstanding this. No, but that's how I understood it. Yeah, that's how the gateway can verify that it's actually talking to Istio D, right?
Yeah, correct.
For the initial establishment of communication. Okay.
In some cases
Yes.
where, because we allow user to create a regular AGMI certificate for HTOD, and that still works, and it's still probably best practice. And we still allow to use client certificates that are mounted from whatever other sources, including external providers, or manager, whatever, that can be used with MTLS to take to HTOD. I think we no longer support, or it's supported, but again, it depends on how if you put something in front of HTOD or not. So there are many cases that exist in in this area. So we should make sure that we don't break any of the existing ones. And user with trust bundle, they still have ability to customize it themselves. I mean, especially with what we discussed in the first part of the meeting, they should be able, when they customize the deployment for gateways, waypoints, and everything else, to use a downward API and create, the normal standard Kubernetes way to use cluster trust bundles. If I make any sense here.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, ultimately, a bunch of permutations of how to configure this, but probably aren't all documented, or if they're documented, they're hard to find.
That's unfortunate. I mean, the code is kind of, if you look at the code, it's still there.
Yeah.
So the biggest problem we had with this in the past, because we did some experience in the past, was that we have the injection, especially for sidecars, but that's no longer an issue for ambient, where the names that we injected conflicted with the names that the user normally added to the pod, and that created some problems. But with ambient, it should be perfectly okay.
Sure.
Even though I don't know exactly how it will work with ambient, because again, the tunnel is per node and it has its own. So the entire, multi-tenant with multiple trust certificates with Z-tunnel, it's a mystery to me. Does anyone know how to work? I mean, or are we talking of features that are specific to sidecars?
All right, yeah, that's all I had. Thank you.
I guess, could I introduce my topic? Or
Yeah, go for it.
yeah, so to give a little bit of background, the sidecar API using a feature flag allows you to terminate inbound TLS connections using externally provisioned certificates. So like stuff that isn't provisioned via like Istio CSR or via Citadel. And I'd like to propose addition to the API, which allows you to specify the upstream protocol when using this feature. So another background is that like when you enable TLS termination at the sidecar is hard-coded to send traffic to the upstream over HTTP1. And since most of our workloads are gRPC services, they need the protocol to be HTTP2. So this is not needed for us like critically, because there's envoy filter mechanisms that we can employ, and we probably will employ because we need this before a new Istio release. But just for like not only our convenience, and if this like feature ever needs to be used by other customers, I opened this PR for an API change. And I just like some thoughts about this change.
No, this is great. Thank you so much for taking the time, especially you don't need this yourself, but still open an issue in upstream and then show up in the meeting. So the service protocol configuration, do we see it useful in the context of ambient? Because I noticed the sidecar proto you have, I think it's strictly for the sidecar resources.
I'm not exactly familiar with ambient, but I think the migration strategy is some thought that should be considered for ambient as well, especially in this era, because I don't think we're the only users that are migrating from like existing like TLS public key infrastructure. But we haven't really been experimenting with ambient yet. It is on our mind, but some background, we're not even on Kubernetes. So it's something we're thinking about long term in the future.
Yeah. Again, thank you for bringing this up. I think just for folks in the call, John and I chatted about this in the thread at a high level. But what I think the ambient implications for this are a bit different because ambient only is working at TCP for like the actual redirection bits. So the protocol that the service is listening for is somewhat not necessary, at least the layer 7 protocols. For client TLS, that does become more of an issue if, for example, or client or server manual, like non-mesh TLS. I don't think we have a way today. Yeah, I don't think we have a way today to sort of terminate those manually at the waypoint, or have ztunnel do telemetry. Well, actually, no, telemetry is the same because again, it's TCP. But yeah, waypoint's the issue there. I think generally, like, this is definitely something that we want. The only problem is that it's like in a sidecar API where we don't have an equivalent for ztunnel. Really, the sidecar API is more of like origin workload settings. I don't even know a good naming is hard, but like what we're trying to describe here are the characteristics of the workload being captured. It's more capture config than anything else. And if this resource was named capture config, it would be super easy. I think yes, I'd definitely add it. I think because it's named sidecar, it's sort of tough because it feels like this only lives in the sidecar world. So depending on how you want to tackle this could be a small conversation or a large conversation as far as how we solve this.
I mean, I kind of don't want to speak on ambient because it's not something I'm super familiar with, but if the sidecar mechanism is always around, like the sidecar can't serve as like a short-term like migration like period. But that might not be very satisfying. So
yeah, I think what we're trying to do from a project perspective is try to limit the limit drift between the two implementations, sidecar and ambient. And so when we see things like this, where like on the facially on the surface, it looks like it only applies to sidecar. That's where you give it a bit of a closer look. But to your point, and what John said in the chat, this is also a problem for ambient. But the place where this lives is not, like, we don't have an API for this for ambient. So that's where I think the complexity lies. I do definitely agree, though, like from the migrate, that this use case is very real. It's probably more prevalent than I've got exposure to living in Kubernetes world. Like, there are a lot of people who have existing PKI infrastructure who are trying to move over, and because of the way that we've built ambient to be more performant, to be more composable, etc., like, we're probably going to have more users run into this for ambient as well. So I'm thankful you bringing this up, because we're going to have to solve this problem anyway at some point, I think. Yeah, I'll take a step. I've talked a lot. What other people think? Did people hear me, or just I'm trying to make sure I wasn't on mute when I was saying that?
Yeah, I think I need a little bit more time to think about it. If I understand you correctly, Will, I think you have a workaround maybe using Envoy filter. Is that correct?
Yeah, essentially like completely replacing the inbound cluster with one like where we explicitly specify the HTTP protocol options. I mean, we haven't really prototyped it, but just from a theoretical sense, I think it will work. I'm pretty confident it will work.
Okay, yeah, I think as a project, we have to understand the ambient impact, like Keith was mentioning, because it's a goal in our project to add functionality to ambient and sidecar when it both make sense. We kind of made a decision. We didn't want to just simply pile features to the sidecar without considering impacts to ambient. So give us a little bit more time to think about that. And right now, I don't know if there's anybody interested in lining up to work on this in ambient, because most likely you won't be able to, because you're not even looking at the ambient at the point, right?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. We don't really have like a need for this in the API, like in the short or even medium term, because we're probably going to look into the Envoy filter mechanism anyway. So I just I mean, hopefully I can like join that conversation when it arises, because eventually we will be considering ambient, and it would be like nice to get exposure to like all the decisions there as well.
Yeah, definitely. And in fact, the fact that you open up the issue, so we have a record in our GitHub, so we know who else is asking for this. That's actually super helpful too. Okay, we have 2 minutes left. John, did you want to mention your leave so that everybody is aware?
Yeah, I just want to. So I'll be on parental leave, but eventually, I guess it's TBD when. Should be mid-April, roughly. It's only 4 weeks, so not that big of a deal. But if there's anything you need from me before then, in terms of information sharing and whatnot, let me know so I can make sure I get that to you. Probably mostly / only relevant to the release managers though, given there's a release during that time. So yeah, just let me know if you need anything.
And how long do you plan to be out, just so everyone knows?
4 weeks.
Okay. Thank you. Jackie, you have a quick thing. Is that quick or publishing?
Somewhat quick, but I can save it for next time. It's no
Okay, well, because we have a minute. If it's fast, I'll let you go. But if not, maybe next time it's better. I'll let you
Lightning
decide.
round.
Okay, I'll throw the idea out there, but you know, we don't always address like all of the reported CVEs and vulnerabilities because they actually don't have an impact on us. They might be related to dependencies we have, but they're not actually impacting Istio. So we don't actually end up fixing some of them or doing like a security, or rather we end up fixing them, but we don't do, or upgrading, but we don't do a security release, and we'll upgrade them in the next patch. So when people do like vulnerability scans, they'll see that we're technically vulnerable because we have, you know, dependencies on vulnerable packages or things like that. But they have no way of knowing that we've investigated them and it's not actually impactful to Istio. So I was just curious if, you know, it'd be we'd be interested in having documents that track, you know, hey, we've investigated this. You know, this vulnerability is not affecting us. You know, we'll, you know, upgrade the versions in the next release, but we're not doing a security release, so that people could consume this when they're doing like vulnerability scans. So I just threw out the VEX document here. You know, it's not supported by all vulnerability scanners, but I think it might be a good option, or I'll look into others. But just throwing that idea out there, if that'd be something we'd be willing to maintain.
All right, that's great. I think it's a great idea. The main challenge I see is if we have enough staff willing to and have bandwidth to maintain this, like you said.
Sure, I thought it could be a responsibility of the product security working group, but I haven't brought that up there.
Yeah, can you bring up there and see if the product security work group can and be willing to entertain this? Because I think they are the ones who probably going to make the final decision. To me, I think it's a good idea for the project and for the community as well.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, ultimately just want to give users a little more insight into the investigations that we've done, so they're not just like, oh man, they're not fixing it out of SLA. Oh, I'm upset. So try to make the vulnerability scanners a little smarter.
Yes, totally. All right, we're right on time. John will get you your KIT next time. Then I don't think you're finished fast.
Yeah, that's no rush. That's more just long-term discussions. So.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks everybody for joining. See you guys later. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye all.